She doesn't want protection. She wants presence, not the kind of presence that stands guard at the door, but the kind that sits beside her in silence, holding space for her to unfold. She doesn't need a shield. She needs a mirror, a reflection that doesn't distort her essence, but honors it. In a world that taught her to armor up, to brace for impact, to anticipate abandonment, your presence is the sanctuary she never knew she could have. Not because you fix her, but because you see her. Not because you lead her, but because you walk with her. In the quiet moments, when words are scarce and vulnerability is abundant, your presence speaks volumes. It says, I am here. I am not leaving. You are safe. And in that safety, she doesn't just survive, she thrives. Because presence is not passive. It is powerful. It is the foundation upon which trust is built, intimacy is nurtured, and love is actualized. So be the presence that doesn't flinch, that doesn't flee, that doesn't falter. Be the presence that stays, that supports, that sees, because in the end, she doesn't want protection. She wants you fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. She wants you rooted not in your armor, but in your awareness. Not in performance, but in presence. Because she can feel the difference. She can feel when you're physically there, but emotionally gone. She can feel when your eyes are looking, but not seeing. When your ears are hearing, but not listening. And what she craves isn't your strength in battle. It's your strength in stillness. The kind that can sit with her storm without trying to solve it. The kind that doesn't retreat when the waves rise, but anchors deeper into being. This isn't the fantasy of the wounded protector, rushing in to rescue. This is the medicine of the awakened man, who knows how to hold space instead of taking control. Because she's not asking for saviors anymore. She's asking for witnesses. She's asking for depth. She's asking for a presence so unwavering that she can finally put her sword down. And here's the truth they never told you. It takes more courage to sit with her pain than to fight her enemies. It takes more power to stay through the silence than to charge into conflict. It takes more masculinity to be present than to be dominant, because presence requires you to confront your own ghosts, to sit with your own discomfort, to meet her vulnerability without running from your own. And when you do, when you become the man who no longer hides behind fixing, who no longer fears emotional terrain, who no longer confuses control with care, she will feel it in her bones, in her breath, in the way she softens, not because she is weak, but because she has finally found a place strong enough to rest her fire. And when a woman rests her fire, not because it's been extinguished, but because it's finally respected, she becomes something untouchable, unshakable, uncontainable. She becomes the very force that civilizations rise for, and the wisdom that empires fall to. But she can only become that in the presence of a man who doesn't shrink in her intensity. A man who does not need her to be small, to feel large. Who does not need her to be quiet, to feel heard. Who does not need her to be easy, to feel safe. She's not looking for ease. She's looking for truth, not just in words, in energy, in presence, in your breath. When she tells you something sacred, in your eyes, when she shows you her shadow, in your silence, when her soul begs to be held, not handled, because the truth is, Your presence, when it's real, when it's grounded, when it's undivided, it heals. It doesn't fix her. It reminds her that she was never broken. And when she's reminded of that, she becomes the kind of woman who no longer loves out of fear, but from a place of wholeness. And in that place, your connection is no longer a contract of protection. It becomes a dance of presence. Two whole beings, meeting, listening, unfolding, without pretending, without performing, without disappearing behind masks of who they think they need to be. That is real union. Not the kind written in vows, but the kind spoken in energy. Not the kind sealed with rings, but the kind etched into silence. The kind that doesn't bind you, but frees you. Because when you show up with presence, you are no longer her protector. You are her partner in truth, no longer her savior, but her sanctuary. And she becomes yours. Because presence isn't something you give to her. It's something you share with her. It's a mutual recognition that neither of you needs to be anyone else to be worthy of love, devotion, or depth. She will test it. Not because she wants to hurt you, but because she needs to know that you are real, that your stillness won't evaporate when the emotion floods, that your grounding isn't conditional, that your presence doesn't disappear the moment she stops being easy to handle. And when you remain, when your breath slows instead of your fists clenching, when your eyes stay soft, even when hers are aflame, she will trust you with a kind of trust that kingdoms were built on, not because you overpowered her, but because you never tried to. You didn't see her chaos as something to conquer. You saw it as a compass. And in doing so, you proved something most men never will. That your masculinity isn't a wall. It's a witness, a space, a mirror, a rhythm steady enough to catch her free fall and remind her without ever saying a word. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. And when she hears that not through your mouth, but through your being, 1,000 walls she forgot she built begin to crumble, because you didn't just give her attention. You gave her presence. You didn't just stand beside her. You stood within her moment. And that's what she's been starving for. Not gestures, not protection wrapped in pride, but something ancient, something primal, something that says, I see you, I feel you, and I'm not afraid of you. She doesn't want a man who flinches at her fury. She wants one who recognizes it as the same fire that burns in him. She doesn't need a man who silences her sadness. She wants one who can sit inside it and breathe. That's the kind of man she opens to. Not the one who breaks her open. The one who makes her feel safe enough to open herself. And when she does, when the petals peel back, when the thorns fall away, when the raw, radiant, untamed essence of her stands before you, will you stand there too? Or will you do what men have always done? Flinch, run, label, control. Or will you remain silent, steady, unmoved by her magnitude, because you have already stood in the magnitude of your own? That is what she wants. Not your armor, not your promises, not your performance. Just you, present, real, unafraid, unmasked. And when you give her that, she will not just follow you. She will walk beside you as your equal, as your mirror, as your sacred counterpart in the world that has forgotten what it means to truly be seen. And in that mutual seeing, something holy awakens. Not religion, not doctrine, but a raw, embodied remembrance that love was never about control. It was about presence. That masculinity was never about power over. It was about power within. The world has taught men to protect by building walls. But the sacred man, he protects by staying open. He does not need to guard her. He guards a space where she can become all that she is. He doesn't lead her into safety. He creates safety by being the kind of man who does not abandon himself when things get hard. And that kind of man, he doesn't just protect, he transforms. He becomes the invitation for her to breathe again, to soften again, to trust the kind of connection that doesn't suffocate, but liberates. Because presence liberates. It doesn't cage. It doesn't ask for performance. It asks for truth. And when two people bring their truth to each other, without flinching, without fixing, without folding, what they create is not a relationship. It is a revolution of love, rooted not in fantasy, but in reality, not in perfection, but in presence. That is what she wants. Not your silence, not your sword, not your strategies. She wants your spirit. Here, now, unhidden, unarmed, because she's not asking you to fight for her. She's asking you to feel with her, to stand with her, to walk into the storm beside her, and never ever let go of yourself while you hold her. And when you can do that, when you can hold her without losing you, stand firm without making her shrink, love without owning, witness without managing, you become what the world is starving for. A man not driven by ego, but led by essence. A man who doesn't confuse presence with passivity, who doesn't hide behind silence, or wield his voice as a weapon. A man who can meet her chaos with calm, her rage with reverence, her tenderness with tenacity, not because he has mastered her, but because he has met himself. He has sat in the fire of his own becoming and learned to stay. And so when she burns, he doesn't run. He doesn't try to douse her. He doesn't fear the flames. He knows the fire. He respects it. He's walked through it. And that is what makes him unshakable. Not because he is immune to emotion, but because he is intimate with it. Not because he suppresses his fear, but because he has befriended it. Not because he controls her expression, but because he honors it. That is the kind of presence she cannot resist, because it doesn't trap her. It frees her. It doesn't take. It invites. It doesn't hover. It holds. And in that sacred holding, that unspoken covenant of soul with soul, she no longer has to wonder. If she's too much, she no longer has to shrink to make space for your strength. She no longer has to perform just to feel protected. She knows she's safe. Not because you told her, but because you showed her. And when a woman knows she is safe, not from danger, but from dismissal, from judgment, from being told her truth is too wild, too loud, too inconvenient, she blooms. Not for you, but because of you. Because you created the rarest thing a woman can receive from a man who has truly met himself. Room. A room to breathe. Room to unravel. Room to rebuild without conditions. And that room is the holy ground, where the most sacred of unions is formed. Not the union of protector and protected, not of the pedestal and the pleasing, but of two sovereign beings who no longer need to play roles because they are too busy being real. In that space, love stops being a transaction and becomes a transformation. She no longer asks for flowers. She becomes the garden. She no longer asks you to fix her. She becomes her own medicine. And you become her sanctuary, not her escape, but her return, the place she comes back to over and over, not because she must, but because she chooses. And isn't that the deepest desire? To be chosen, not out of dependency, but out of devotion. To be loved, not for the mask you wear, but for the soul you dare to reveal. That's what presence gives you. Not power over her, but power with her. The kind of power that doesn't command, but connects. The kind of love that doesn't demand, but draws out. The kind of manhood that doesn't dominate, but anchors. So if you want to lead her not with your hands, but with your heart wide open, not with your protection, but with your presence. Because presence is not a posture. It's not a performance. It's a practice, a daily commitment to stay awake, to stay open, to stay willing to witness the storms without shutting down, willing to hold her clarity and confusion in equal reverence, willing to drop the need to be the hero and becomes a harbor. Because in your presence, she doesn't need saving. She remembers she was never lost. In your presence, she doesn't need to compete with the ghosts of your past. She becomes the moment that holds you fully. And you become the man who is finally not running. That kind of man is rare. Not because the world lacks men, but because the world has taught men to abandon presence in favor of performance, to chase applause instead of attunement, to lead from the head instead of the soul. But now you know better. Now you felt the weight of what it means to stay, to listen without solving, to witness without interfering, to love without controlling. And because you've stayed, she will bloom, not into who you want her to be, but into who she already is, underneath the armor she wore, just to survive a world full of absent men. But you chose differently. You chose to be here fully, fiercely, quietly, powerfully, and because of that, you will never need to prove your love. Your presence will speak it in every breath. And that presence, that grounded, unwavering, soul-rooted presence, it becomes your signature, not your looks, not your status, not your charm. Your presence, it becomes the echo of your integrity, the pulse of your masculinity, the weight of your wordless vow. I will not leave, not in discomfort, not in fear, not in the face of your storm or mine, because the true man does not measure his power by how loud he can speak, but by how deeply he can listen to her words, to her silence, to his own still inner truth that tells him you were not born to protect her from the world. You were born to stand beside her. As she remembers, she never needed protection, only presence. And the man who can give that, not just once, but every day, every moment, through the ordinary and the chaos, he becomes unforgettable, not because he made her dependent, but because He helped her remember she was never less than whole. He becomes etched in her memory, not as a rescuer, but as the witness who never blinked while she rose from her own ashes. That is the love she waits for. That is the energy she surrenders to. That is the man she gives all of herself to, not because she has to, but because in him she sees the same thing. She's been fighting to reclaim truth, stillness, power, presence. And that is where it ends. Or maybe where it finally begins. Because in truth, presence is never the end. It is always the beginning of deeper love, of higher trust, of the kind of intimacy that doesn't cling, but expands. Presence creates space. And space allows breath, and breath shared between two souls, no longer performing, becomes sacred. She doesn't need you to conquer her fears. She needs you to stand beside her while she faces them. She doesn't need you to fill her voids. She needs you to honor them, to hold the space without fixing, without fleeing, without flinching, to stay present, to stay aware, to stay yours. Because when you stay with yourself, you can stay with her. And that's when something eternal opens between you. Not codependency, not fantasy, but communion. A moment where two beings recognize each other beyond the body, beyond the stories, beyond the masks. A moment where love stops being a transaction and becomes a truth, where the masculine no longer guards or dominates, but guides through devotion, where the feminine no longer begs for protection, but dances in her own radiance unapologetically because she knows he sees her, he honors her, he meets her, and that meeting of soul with soul, of silence with silence, of breath with breath is what she's been searching for. And you're not here to impress her. You are here to meet her in the depth, in the stillness, in the fire, and in the presence that says, without a single word, I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, when no words are needed, when everything is felt, when everything is real, something ancient awakens. Something the modern world forgot in its race for validation, its obsession with dominance, its addiction to performance. That something is sacred, not religious, not scripted, but sacred. Because when presence enters the room, when a man arrives in his wholeness, without agenda, without ego, without a script to follow or a mask to wear, he does more than hold space. He becomes it. He becomes the stillness that calms, the gravity that steadies, the energy that says, you can rage, you can cry, you can collapse, and I won't run, I won't rescue, I will remain. And in that remaining, love is no longer a performance. It becomes a practice, an act of devotion, not just to her, but to truth, to integrity, to the divine space between two people who no longer seek to change each other, but to know each other. That's what she was waiting for. Not protection, presence. Because presence doesn't try to prove itself. It radiates. And in that quiet radiance, she doesn't just feel safe. She feels seen. Not for who the world wants her to be, but for who she truly is. Raw, radiant, untamed. And you, the man who dared to meet her there, without shrinking, without controlling, without needing her to be less. You didn't just win her, you woke her. And in waking her, you woke the deepest truth in yourself, that the greatest power you hold is not in what you do, but in how deeply you're willing to be. And from that place of being, not striving, not pretending, but being, you become the embodiment of everything she thought didn't exist. A man who listens without fear, a man who holds without possession, a man who stands without towering, a man who loves without conditions. She doesn't want your perfection. She doesn't want your protection. She wants your presence, because your presence is the one thing no one else can fake, no one else can offer, no one else can give her but you. And when you give her that, without fear, without flinch, without performance, you invite her into a love where she is not required to be anything but herself. And that is rare. That is real. That is revolutionary. Because most men will offer her promises, but only a few will offer her their full living presence. The ones who do, they don't just become partners. They become portals into deeper love, into divine intimacy, into a world where truth is the only language spoken, and silence is no longer feared, but felt. That is what she's been longing for. Not the man who arrives with loud declarations, but the one who arrives quietly, fully, and never leaves. Not in the body, not in the mind, not in the soul. The man who understands that his real strength was never in how much he could protect her, but in how much of himself he was willing to reveal. And in doing so, he doesn't just give her love, he becomes it. So let the world keep chasing noise. Let others keep chasing control, status, and surface love. You were not made for that. You were made for depth, for reverence, for the kind of presence that transforms not just her, but you. Because in the end, your greatest offering was never your protection. It was your willingness to be fully here, fully seen, fully alive, not as her savior, not as her shield, but as her mirror, her anchor, her witness in the sacred unraveling of who she truly is. And when you stand there, unflinching, unmasked, unwavering, you will realize she never wanted a man to fight the world for her. She wanted a man who could face himself, stand in that fire, and say, I am not going anywhere. That is presence, and that is love.